Hello and thanks for joining us for today's video. Before we get into today's video, we just want to tell you that we're always looking for new cases to cover. This includes cases for our other channel, Paranormally Listed, and our podcast, Into the Killing. For Paranormally Listed, we want to hear about strange and supernatural stories or mysteries that can't be explained. This includes your own possible experiences with the supernatural. As for Into the Killing, we're looking for cold cases that were eventually solved. To suggest a case, please visit our website, criminallylisted.com, and go to the suggested case page. Speaking of suggestions, we actually have a suggestion we want to make to you, and it's regarding how your home and car smell. I'm always looking for a product that will make my home and car smell great. That's why I'm happy I found Drift, who's today's sponsor. Drift is the sister company of one of my favorite companies, the fragrance subscription service, Scentbird. Scentbird leaves me smelling great, and Drift makes my home and car smell amazing. Drift's air fresheners are sustainable, and their scents are made with natural, essential, and fragrance oils. Their products for your vehicle are unique. They include stone fresheners, wood fresheners, and metal fresheners. For your home, they have candles, reeds, and home sprays. It's the one-stop shop to make your car and home smell great. I love Drift's air fresheners because you can get a subscription. First, you get a starter kit with a clip and a scent. They recommend changing the scent every 30 days. I personally love getting the scent of the month, which is a new limited edition scent. They're inspired by the season, and whenever I smell them, they invoke memories and emotions. This month they send me a scent called Seaside, and it's amazing. It has a clean and fresh, almost soapy smell. It makes me feel like I'm in a small town on the coast of the Mediterranean. I can almost hear the waves crashing. Also, you may have heard of nose blindness before and thought it was just a marketing ploy, but it's a real thing, and getting the scent of the month is a great way to fight nose blindness. The good news is that if you don't feel like you need a new scent every month, their subscription is very flexible. You can change your scent choice, your delivery frequency, or cancel your subscription anytime you like. Make sure you use my coupon code CListed55 for 55% off at Drift for your first month. Check out Drift today by clicking on the link below in the description box so you can have your car and home smell amazing. Number 3. Marco Flores. When Marco Flores was 3 years old, his mother left him with his 14-year-old brother, Oscar, in Metapan, El Salvador. She moved to the United States, and she said she would eventually send for him. 3 years later, Oscar handed Marco off to some strangers who drove him north. They passed him off to people in another car. Marco kept getting passed off until he reached Mexico. Then he was put on a flight to Boston, Massachusetts. He was greeted there by his mother, whom he didn't recognize after not seeing for 3 years. Marco moved into his mother's apartment in East Boston. Marco's mother worked 7 days a week cleaning offices. 2 years after Marco arrived, his brother Oscar came to the United States. He also worked cleaning offices. 21-year-old Jamie Gonzalez lived down the street from the family. He quickly became friends with them. Soon, he was babysitting Marco after school. When Marco was 9, he discovered Galdames had hidden a camera in his room and recorded him while he was changing clothes. Then, when he turned 10, Galdames started sexually abusing him. The abuse continued until Marco was 13 years old. The following year, Marco started experiencing panic attacks. Marco then decided to get physically fit and went to the gym often. Galdames was still part of the family's life, but Marco didn't associate with him much. Then May 2011, 17-year-old Marco wanted to make a video for a school project, but he needed a digital camera. There was only one person he knew with a digital camera, Galdames. He went to his apartment and asked him if he could borrow the camera. Galdames said yes and told him it was in a drawer. Marco opened the drawer and saw a picture of his young nephew sitting on Jamie's lap. Beneath that photo was a stack of other photos. Marco took the camera and left, but his mind couldn't stop stirring. He thought that Galdames was sexually abusing his nephew. Not only that, but he thought that other kids might be in danger. Marco had a pit bull, but his mother made him give it away. However, he still had the choke chain he used to train the dog. He took the chain and the camera over to Galdames' apartment. Once he was inside Galdames' home, He pointed the camera at him and started asking him questions. Galdames then confessed that he had sexually abused Marco. Marco put the chain around Galdames' neck. Galdames seemed to accept what was happening. He asked Marco not to stab him because he thought it would be too painful. Marco then had him sit in a chair in front of a mirror. He then put duct tape around his wrist and wrapped duct tape around his head. He then pulled on the chain until 27-year-old Jamie Galdames stopped moving. Marco recorded the murder. Once Galdames was dead, Marco moved his body onto the bed. He sprayed lighter fluid around the apartment. He collected the camera and Galdames' computer and left. He returned the next morning and threw a match into the apartment from an open window. He waited to start the fire because he wanted to make sure that the other residents of the building were awake and could get out of their apartments. Afterward, he went home. He confessed to his mother and his brother Oscar. They suggested that he turn himself in, so he did so. 17-year-old Marco Flores told the police about the abuse and how he thought Galdames was abusing his nephew, so he killed him. He handed over the video camera where he recorded the confession and the murder at the computer. Marco was charged with first-degree murder. After all, Marco had planned out the murder and then covered it up. The police searched Galdames' computer and found hundreds of photos of preteen boys. They also found 50,000 encrypted lines of chat in which Galdames talked about grooming and abusing children. He also talked about some children he knew and wrote there were some good ones coming up. One of those kids was Marco's nephew. 2 years after the murder, in May 2011, 19-year-old Marco Flores took a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to manslaughter and he received 15 years of prison. The judge gave him 15 years because he said the court would not tolerate vigilante justice. 4 years after Marco was sent to prison, he was interviewed by a reporter for the Boston Globe. Marco said, "Killing someone is never worth it, but I don't feel bad for him. I feel he was a very bad person. It's not like he tried to seek help. He chose to do it. I'm not saying I don't have remorse, but I don't feel sad for him passing away." Marco Flores will most likely be released in 2025. He'll probably be deported to El Salvador. He is serving a sentence at the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center in Shirley, Massachusetts. Number 2. Aaron Vargas. Fort Bragg is a small city on the coast of California. It was home to 31-year-old Aaron Vargas. In February 2009, things seemed to be going well for Vargas after several rough years. He was engaged and he had a 6-month-old daughter. He was just weeks away from getting married. But for years he had suffered from bouts of depression. He would binge drink and he was arrested several times for DUI. He also had problems holding down a job. Several times he moved away from Fort Bragg. When he moved, he did well, but then something would happen and he would move back home. Daryl McNeil was considered a pillar of the community. The 63-year-old husband and father owned an appliance store. He was a mentor with big brothers and big sisters. He was also a Boy Scout leader. On February 8, 2009, 31-year-old Aaron Vargas was drinking beer and vodka. He got a Civil War replica pistol and drove over to McNeil's mobile home. McNeil answered the door and Vargas shot him in the stomach. McNeil's third wife ran into the room and recognized Vargas. He told her not to call 911 until after he left. He then told McNeil's wife that McNeil had been abusing him since he was 11 years old. Once he watched the 67-year-old draw his last breath, 31-year-old Anthony Vargas left. He then drove to his parents' home. For the first time, he told his parents about the abuse. McNeil had been their neighbor for years, and Vargas had been close friends with McNeil's son. The first time the abuse happened was on a camping trip when he was 11. Vargas said that the abuse had continued into adulthood. He said that even when he would leave town, McNeil would track him down and stalk him. He told his parents that McNeil would give him odd jobs like delivering furniture. He would then give him drugs and alcohol and have sex with him. Sometimes he was unconscious when this happened. Recently, McNeil had been calling him daily. Sometimes he called him up to 30 times a day. McNeil would show up at his house unannounced with diapers and offer to babysit. Vargas claimed that when he went to McNeil's home, he didn't plan to kill him. He just wanted the torment to end. Hours after the murder, Vargas was arrested. After the murder hit the news, about a dozen men in their 30s and 40s came forward and said that McNeil had abused and stalked them as well. One of those men was McNeil's stepson. After McNeil's second wife, who was the man's mother, left McNeil, she tried to report the abuse to the police. But the statute of limitations had run out, so McNeil wasn't charged. Several other people had reported abuse at the hands of McNeil over the years to the police. But the police couldn't locate the victims, or the statute of limitations had run out. One question many people had was, how did McNeil have control over Vargas even as an adult? Forensic psychiatrist Dr. Michael Wellner said, "You take someone who is vulnerable and you get them formative, and you attach them all through their development, and you get in their DNA. And that's how you have people who even in adulthood are doing things totally unacceptable to them, and yet at the same time they're powerless to break away from it." Many people in Fort Bragg supported Vargas. There was a petition requesting leniency and thousands of people signed it. There were also fundraisers, including spaghetti dinners, to raise money for Vargas's defense. A surprise guest at the first fundraiser was McNeil's third wife, who was there when he was shot to death. She also wrote a letter to the prosecutor. She defended Vargas's actions, writing, "I do believe that something having to do with Aaron's childhood sexual abuse caused Aaron to snap and do what he did." In March 2010, Aaron Vargas pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter. The prosecution wanted Vargas to be punished harshly. A probation officer testified and recommended that Vargas get 21 years in prison, which was the maximum. He believed that Vargas and McNeil had a consensual relationship as adults, and he murdered Vargas to cover it up. However, a psychiatrist testified and said that it was clear that Vargas had been abused for years. The judge said he could not be lenient. He said the circumstances support the conclusion the defendant intended to kill the victim, and the method was intended to make the victim suffer. Also, he couldn't give him just probation because it would be a stamp of approval of what he did. He said that Vargas should have let the legal system do its job. Aaron Vargas was sentenced to 9 years in prison. It's unclear what happened to Aaron Vargas after he was sentenced, but he could have been paroled after 4 years. If he had served his entire sentence, including time served before pleading guilty, he would have finished his sentence in early 2018. Number 1. Clark Fredericks. In June 2012, 68-year-old Dennis Pegg lived alone in Stillwater, New Jersey. Stillwater is a small town with a population of about 4,000. Pegg was a veteran who had served in Vietnam. For 28 years he worked as a correctional officer and then 7 years as a park ranger. He was also a Boy Scout leader between 1973 and 1980. In 2012, he was the president of both the Historical Society of Stillwater Township and the Sussex County Historical Society. Pegg was a member of the NRA and a weapons expert. Pegg loved to birdwatch and started the Sussex County Bird Club. He was also known to help hikers on the trails near the town by giving them water and food. He was considered a good neighbor. He'd pay neighborhood boys to mow his lawn. Pegg never got married and didn't have any children. On the night of June 12, 2012, 68-year-old Dennis Pegg was home alone watching ESPN. The next day, a town councilor called the sheriff's office and asked them to do a welfare check on Peg. Officers went there and found blood in the doorway. They got inside the house and found the dead body of Dennis Peg in a pool of blood in his living room. He had been stabbed 30 times in the chest and his throat had been slit. The police made an arrest that afternoon. The reason the counselor had called the police was because a woman called her because she was concerned about her son, 46-year-old Clark Fredericks. Fredericks had come home around 2 a.m. covered in blood, but it didn't appear to be his blood. However, he did have some cuts on his hands. She wanted him to go to the hospital, but he refused. Instead, he took some sleeping pills and went to bed. In custody, Fredericks said that Peg got what was coming to him, and he was a child molester for years. Fredericks explained that Peg was a family friend and had visited his family frequently. Peg even lived with Fredericks' family after he was injured in a car accident. Peg was also Fredericks' scout leader. Fredericks said that between the ages of 8 and 12, Peg had sexually abused him. Peg also told him he sexually abused other boys. One boy was a friend of his, only known as Jeff. Jeff ended up taking his own life in 1983. Fredericks said that Peg used to intimidate him into keeping quiet. He once beat up a dog in front of him and told him to keep quiet. Fredericks said that he kept the abuse secret up until the night of June 12, 2012. That night, he and his friend, 46-year-old Robert Reynolds, were drinking and doing cocaine. Fredericks started talking about the abuse and they decided to go kill Peg. Reynolds drove Fredericks to Peg's home. The front door was unlocked and the two men walked in. Fredericks said that when he stabbed Peg, he repeatedly said, "How does it feel raping little boys now?" When he was done stabbing him, he slashed his throat. Reynolds watched from the front entrance. Robert Reynolds was arrested later that day. Both men were charged with first-degree murder. After the murder hit the news, other men came forward. They had similar stories of sexual abuse at the hands of Peg. The police acknowledged that people had made allegations against Peg decades ago, but he was never arrested because people recanted their accusations. In the early 1980s, the police investigated Peg for 2 years, but they could never come up with enough evidence to charge him with anything. After his murder, the police found child pornography on his computer. Several people reported that Peg had a box with Polaroid photos of boys he had abused. The police did find a box of photos, but none of the photos were considered pornographic. After Clark Fredericks was arrested, he was evaluated by psychiatrists from the defense and the prosecution. Both psychiatrists concluded that Peg had sexually abused him. Clark Fredericks sat in jail for 3 years, awaiting his trial. He ultimately agreed to a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to passion/provocation manslaughter, which came with a sentence of 5 to 10 years. At Fredericks' sentencing hearing in December 2015, he admitted that he didn't handle the situation properly. He said, "I don't recommend that anyone follow in my steps. No matter how painful it may seem, I urge everyone to speak out about abuse." The district attorney read a statement from Peg's family. They admitted some wrongdoing on his part, but he never had a chance to defend himself against the accusations. They said that Fredericks was, quote, "a self-appointed judge, jury, and executioner. You chose to savagely end his life with your unlawful action. Ironically, you asked for justice only after you killed the person you say harmed you," unquote. Then the judge handed down his sentence. He actually said sorry to Fredericks that he had to send him to prison. He gave him the minimum, which was 5 years of prison. Since he had already served 3.5 years, he would only have to serve 9 months before he was eligible for parole. Robert Reynolds pleaded guilty to third-degree robbery and hindering. In August 2016, he was sentenced to 4 years of prison. He served a couple more months in jail and he was paroled. Clark Fredericks was paroled in January 2017 after serving 4.5 years. When he got out of prison, he became a motivational speaker. Thank you very much for watching. We also want to say a big thank you to Drift for sponsoring this video. Please don't forget to check them out by clicking on the link below this video. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.